Hey, everybody, hither and yon. Welcome to the latest in the Today New Brunswick, Tomorrow the World punk show, punk and many other things. But in terms of how it kind of gets put forward, I actually made use of this podcast within my teaching role, if you can believe that, by speaking to some of our interview guests, right? As well as some of the interview guests I've had on the education show. And so it's been interesting, like, how do you do a bullet point summary of what the show even is about? And I've sort of had some reference to, well, it's sort of like a bit like Wayne's World, a bit, except it's in podcast format, in as much as we're that, late Gen X kind of demographic. And this is actually AI generated in my background. Those of you who are part of this. This is AI generated. It took me some iterations to get to this, to get the prompt engineering just so. But this is 1990s lower middle class basement TV room, according to the AI machine attached to Google, the Gemini application. Gemini. For those of you who are interested in such. Whew, that was a long-winded intro. I'm doing great. My name's Matt Stranick. And I think Dan's doing great too. We were having the pre-show banter. Dan, are you well, my friend?
I'm hanging in there. It's been a pretty eventful week. It's funny, just this show that we're doing tonight has gone through technically kind of 3 iterations of topics, and I kind of just did an amalgam of all 3 in the end. Just in moving around, taking one thing from one topic, a few things from another topic, and then just other things that have come up since then, I guess. But doing okay.
There's a lot of
taking
folks,
care of self, that kind of thing.
There's a lot going on outside the show in terms of personal context for both of us, and there's a lot of stuff going on where, I think you talk about on Facebook and whatever, and we all know about it, but maybe you don't necessarily. Something that I'll sort of put forward, and I think Dan will want to speak to, is we both have lost a friend in the past week. Ryan Hoban, a.k.a. Wally, from the Fredericton skateboard alternative punk scene of the 90s. And he was just one hell of a champion of a guy. I was not personally, close friends with him. But I will say what I've been telling people in my classes when I've been speaking to Wally about some of his podcasting stuff is that he was somebody who means a lot to a lot of people who mean a lot to me. And he was always somebody who was just very reliably attached to the scene. And one of the greatest achievements that he accomplished, in my viewpoint, was getting Fugazi to play in 1998 at the New Maryland Rec Center. He pulled that off. He made that happen, right? Logistics and contracts. So fuck that. I mean, and he was so many things to so many people. And so just respect to Wally. Dan, I think you'd agree, and I probably think you want to add more to that, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was some news that it was not a surprise, but it was a shock. As you mentioned, Ryan Hoban, who's somebody from our hometown who was really involved with the scene there, who for the past year or so had been publicly sort of chronicling his experiences going through cancer and cancer treatment with this podcast, Surprise You Have Cancer. He was also, I think, the first person that I ever really became friends with when my family moved to Fredericton when I was 4. Our second apartment that we had when we moved there was the bottom half of a duplex, kind of next to the train tracks on Gibson Street. And Ryan and his family lived upstairs. And he had cable and I didn't, or my family didn't. And so Saturday mornings especially.
That's major stuff.
Exactly. And we were both 4 or 5 years old and just kind of became friends then. And he's somebody that, I was pretty close with for most of my childhood. And one of the things that I tried to do justice to in the little write-up I did in the show notes was just that he was somebody that like he was friends with everybody.
Yes.
Like growing up, like so many, even just looking at like the things people posted on social media sort of since his passing, it's like all these people that I remember growing up with that I never fucking hung out with, that had like all these great, just like so many like fun time, just like great, awesome times, like spending time with Ryan. At the same time, I would have been hanging out with him, but just like he kind of was like part of every social group. And
it really
like,
was. He was ubiquitous.
He was ubiquitous. Like he was like the loudest and like most entertaining person in pretty much any room that he was in, even from childhood. He was also the first person I know to get diagnosed with ADHD, I think. But and yeah, like he was definitely someone that like he was, of the people I hung out with when I was younger, he was one of the kids that got into trouble kind of thing. And that was actually towards the end of our time. I think when we were in junior high together, he ended up having to transfer to another school and ended up meeting, like following it. That was when he got into skateboarding, was when he ended up getting transferred to this school downtown, and kind of like brought that in a time before the internet. He physically brought that like alternative culture back to all the fucking like dorks in Devon that he was, he still hung out with on the weekends. And that was kind of how I first heard about things like CHSR and like local all ages shows. That kind of stuff was from like Ryan, like, meeting the folks involved with it when he got moved to school across town. And, as we kind of moved on to high school and stuff, and he got more into like the skateboarding scene, and I got more into hanging, like following around like weird older art people and like volunteering at CHSR at probably like too young an age. Like there were definitely like, I didn't need to be going to some of like the volunteer parties when I was like 15, 16, but hey, what are you going to do? But like, and like, we kind of didn't really spend a whole lot of time like directly hanging, sort of like, just part of like the greater scene since then. But he's still somebody that always meant a lot to me, and who I will credit as like the person that just got me into all this bullshit, which for better or worse has had a deep and lasting effect on my life. And like, even just like introducing me to CHSR and like campus radio in general, like that was literally like, that probably kept me out of at least some trouble, even though, like I said, I was like hanging around there when I was like 15, 16, like it was like, that was also where I spent most of my Saturday nights. So I couldn't spend too much time out, like getting into other misadventures, because I had to put together 2 hours worth of radio and then like clean up the studio and put away all the records afterwards. And like, yeah, that was like that, just like radio and the stuff that got introduced in my life through radio was a huge part of that. And like, yeah, actually one of the last big things that I remember, like Ryan and I both kind of tried to start at CHSR at the same time, and I kind of snuck him onto the air when he wasn't fully trained, and we both got in trouble, and we both got yelled at by the station manager for like a good solid several minutes each individually, like behind a closed door, but loud enough so that everybody in the entire station could hear. And I didn't go back to the office during regular office hours. Pardon?
I remember the station manager in person who would have been doing the yelling, right?
Yes, exactly. And yeah, like I kind of like, I helped him like sign up for time when he wasn't fully trained, and like, he had a vast collection of music that was just not considered appropriate for daytime broadcasting at the radio station. But we still tried to make it happen, and we both got in a lot of trouble, and I wouldn't go back to the station during the day for like a good couple years after that, and like only came by like after like 7 or 8 at night to just like hang out at the record library. Yeah, that was, and it was always just one of those things that was kind of held over my head, like, you brought that guy into the station. But like, yeah, like I said, it's funny how like the whole like Coach Wally like alias just came from like an old shirt that he bought at the Salvation Army that was like a Y summer camp coach shirt, but it was just like, everyone just like knew who Wally was, even to the point of like every downtown like weirdo was just like, he had interactions with that just became these like characters of legend to like, you know, the teen scene at the time, I guess. And yeah, it's just, he was, and after, you know, after all that, like, he moved out west. He did a lot of acting. You know, he's in some commercials and stuff. He had his band Minto that put out a couple of CDs as well that I think we probably both put links to in the notes. And yeah, then he became a teacher, and which makes perfect sense because, you know, he's somebody that always seemed to love it, you know, always loved an audience. When we were younger, and like I said, was always the center of attention. And yeah, it's just real sad that he's gone. You know, I kind of wish you know, it's just, you kind of like, you can kick yourself for not reconnecting with people when you feel like, hey, I should probably just reach out and say hi to this person. But, you know, what are you going to do other than, you know, make a point of letting people know that they're important to you when they're around, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Man,
it's been a lot to think about.
Well put. I will say that. Clearly, you know, the passing of anybody as a friend really causes a reflection of sorts, right, over the period.
Yeah.
And as you talk about the Coach Wally perspective, that's exactly like the influence of a real leader, though, in the community.
Yeah, exactly.
Like somebody who has intangible effects on others, right? Just through having, you know, sort of vectored certain things towards them, right? Like the introduction of stuff from the TNB skate scene for cassettes and CDs and shit to you as kind of a teenage mope over in Devon, right? I mean, fuck, that shit is legit. That shit had, and your whole thing about CHSR, man. I mean, you know, I didn't get started programming at CHSR until I was like 20, 21. It was like after my first degree was over, and I was kind of looking for stuff to do. But I mean, to imagine the shows, to imagine, you know, like not listening to the Chickle Pickens show and every other, like, you know, whatever your weird friends are playing at fucking the 11 o'clock to 1 a.m. time slot or whatnot. It brings me back. And the fact that you can tangibly credit specific individuals like Wally, like others we can name, you know, that's a marker of significant impact. That is the impact of legacy. And that's why, you know, I talked about him in the context of, here are other departed people from my scene, right? People like Joe Blades, people like a literary sort of merit who were kind of part of the same, you know, era, right? And, you know, being able to kind of look at it now with the benefit of, you know, hindsight and more years behind you than you have in front of you, really, it becomes like, okay, you get to appreciate where you're going a little bit more. And that is very much directly related to your interactions with these people, because you can see their value over the long term. Whereas before, it was just shit that was happening week to week while you're at school, while you're getting drunk at bars or whatever the fuck, right? And you don't see what's happening in front of you for the significance of it because you lack the perspective. And so now that is one of the cooler things about getting a bit older, I think. And so I think this is a good way to kind of wind up our what we're listening to now generally kind of episode is what this is topic broadly to me, as opposed to what's new, what's from a regional scene, which we've iterated before. Fortunately, this podcast only really aspires to come out about once a month, so I think we're still relatively on track from our last one. We each kind of, every time an episode is supposed to come out, we each kind of play I've got personal circumstances on my mind and I can't. We each take a turn, right? Sometimes I'll be first and then Dan will follow up. So it's a nice system. We build wellness into the show at a granular level, and that fucking shit is intentional. If there's anything that you're thinking of that gets in your way of like your ability to enjoy yourself doing the show, fuck it, blow it off for a week. Who cares, right? This should not be an endeavor where it's in any way stressful at all, right? So I'm glad now that we have the opportunity to do this, because I mean, I did mention, you know, again, within the context of my discussion with my students, you know, we were going to record that night, but then it's just like, meh, you know, it's just kind of like, we're going to talk enjoyably about some shit. However, you got this kind of thing over it, right? So we got a week now behind us, and just the last thing I would just put out there is what an amazing thing that Surprise You Have Cancer podcast is. And I'm just talking.
It's great.
The fact that it is going to exist still online for like 5 years or however the fuck long.
Yeah.
I mean, just strictly the fact that Ryan did become an educator. I didn't find out until after. He was an English teacher. Yeah, that was his thing.
Yeah.
Fuck me. I mean, I've been literally telling students, I'm like, this is a guy who, he's my cohort. He's like within a few years of me. And his thing that he really wanted to do, what he trained up for and everything at that stage in his life was he wanted to be doing what I am doing like in this moment. And that isn't lost on me, man. Just what a privilege that is. And so very much shout out to Ryan, shout out to Shane, the co-host of the Surprise You Have Cancer podcast. And again, I am just glad as an educator and as a human being that repository of significant personal courage and humor is there for other people to experience who have no other connection to it besides an internet connection. I think that's fucking awesome, the era that we live in, for that anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Bro, that's fucking awesome. So are you going to talk about Minto first, or have you already done so? Or
I just Minto. I mean, I mentioned Minto there just as that was sort of his main musical project.
Okay. In terms of the
list, though, I just wanted to generally mention, I don't know, like I said, this sort of ended up being 3 topics in one, because I wanted to, I had to acknowledge just the importance and the impact that Ryan Hoban had on my life, and just full stop. It's funny because it's kind of that inspired me to kind of switch up another inclusion on my list that ties into, kind of indirectly ties into other, or at least someone who has helped archive the work of people that we have spoken to sort of as important people that we have also lost in the past. That being, I guess, I might as well. I'll switch. Yeah, I feel like I'm just getting a little turned around here. But anyways, so I wanted to recognize someone while they're still around on my list as well, to start it out, instead of just because it's definitely ties into things I've been listening to lately, because he's someone who has been making the point of archiving and preserving a lot of kind of the local, regional sort of underground music that otherwise just kind of disappears off into the ether, that we, try to talk about, when we can on this show. And that is a guy named Ian Hart from Halifax, who has played in tons and tons of bands over the past few decades, like The Chits, Risky Business, Envision, a bunch of others. But also on top of that, I think it started because for a while he was working on a history of punk rock in the Maritimes, that I don't know if it ever really, that it was going to be a book and eventually turned into a blog that he was running, where he would do sort of profiles of different bands from around Atlantic Canada, get all the recordings he could, upload them on Mediafire and YouTube, digitize the artwork and that kind of thing, do a little write-up. And on top of the blog, he also has a YouTube channel where he just rips entire demos by bands and just posts it up there. That's called Atlantic Hardcore and Punk, I think. I linked it in the show notes. And just it amazes. It's I don't know. Ian's he's that guy that's been around forever and is still always going to shows and traveling to go to shows and collecting all this stuff. And it's just been great to see him preserve it and make it available to other people. And I think, it's just something that I think is a very valuable resource. And they're shipped by bands that I was in that I don't fucking have, that he has on his channels. My old band that I was in when I first moved to Calgary, in the mid 90s, that demo that I have not had a copy of for decades, he has a copy of, and he ripped to YouTube and put up on his other channel. He has one for just Atlantic Canada music, and another one that's just other stuff that he's collected over the years. And I made sure to link them both in my show notes. And it's just I don't know. That's the kind of shit that I find really important, and for people to just sort of take it on to do it on their own. That and stuff like, you know, the Calgary Gazette Preservation Society blog that just like collects as many local demos as they can. And there's I think it's called East of East, is a project run by Professor Michael McGuire from Mount St. Vincent University that's like collecting Atlantic Canada hip hop stuff. Yeah, I know that Professor McGuire, aka MC Hermit of the Woods, has been working on for a while too there. And just like I just think it's great. And yeah, and like you know, Jason from Supreme Echo Records that I've hyped a bunch here. He's somebody else that, you know, is doing the good work like that. That just I wanted to specifically highlight Ian and the stuff that he does, you know, while he's still around, because, you know, it just I feel like we're getting to that age where there's we end up talking a lot about like, yep, that person's gone. And, you know, the next one of the other inclusions on my list was someone from a different topic that we were going to record on this time that kind of got moved to higher priority because of, you know, someone passing away, that being Sparkmarker. But anyways, yeah, I just kind of wanted to highlight, you know, what Ian's been doing. And I mean, like, he and I worked together at my day job for a while too, even then, and like have hung out literally in like all parts of North America. I've just like run into that guy at shows like over the decades. Like it's like walking into like some fucking scuzzy bar in Chinatown in San Francisco, and like Ian just kind of like pops up. Oh, hey man, you're here too, huh? Like, you know,
serendipitous.
Exactly. Like it's just been for decades. It's been that, and you know, the guy has collected, like, he runs an Instagram account called Hardcore Punk Stuff, where he like takes photos of a lot of like show flyers and like band merch and stuff that he's picked up over the years too. So he's just really been spending a lot of time documenting this stuff, like more recently, like in the past few years. And I don't know. I think it's really, I like it. It makes me happy that someone's doing that. So I just want to say like, hey, Ian, good job. And like recognize him as someone that's still around doing stuff. And yeah, has led to me being able to check out like a ton of like old, like he just put up a bunch of like NFA demos.
No like, fucking way.
And that... like I swear to God, I think I know I have a solid guess on who the person was that gave him a huge box of like early 90s St. John music that he's put up on his channel. That's just been like, oh God, I haven't heard this forever. He even had I don't know if you remember the dude Madison Shadwell that used to come up for poetry readings. How he had a violinist that would play with him. That violinist's prog metal band, their album is even up on his channel. Like it's just, yeah, like
Madison Shadwell's violinist prog metal is what you just said, Dan.
Yes, they were called Hemlock, and their album was called The Fathoms of Exordium.
We're going deep on this, people. Yes. We are going deep, and I remember Hemlock.
Yeah,
and I remember seeing them play, and I remember liking them, and I don't remember making the Shadwell connection.
Yeah, I just knew of them because I did some poetry readings in St. John back in the day when I would do that sort of thing, Shadwell would have his musical accompanist, and his accompanist was that guy.
How you mentioned that aspect of it. I remember Hemlock, you know, being a thing. I just, you know, I wasn't aware of the shared personnel somehow. That's friggin' highly confounding.
You know, if there's a weird, you know, if there's a random connection to be made, I will pull it out of the ether. I can tie you. I can tie the band Sparkmarker to graffiti on the Rock and Rodeo bar in Fredericton in 2 moves, which I will when I talk about them in a minute as well. So
here's some knowledge you can use, people, is what we're going at.
Anyways, so yeah, I figured I'd start off with the positive, you know, after that, you know, feeling kind of heavy about Ryan, and just say like, first thing, what I've been listening to is a shit ton of old Maritime demos. Like, yeah, Ian even uploaded a bunch of recordings by our friends EI. Featuring, you know, Bogmonster music associate Matt Gay, and very, you know, basically like, you know, our crew. Like, and yeah, like stuff like of theirs that I haven't listened to forever. That I saw, I think you had shared the Live from Studio D on Facebook. And it was just like, oh, it's great to see you going out there. You know, the dozens of views are all probably people we know, but hey, that's what this stuff is for.
So we are deeply supportive and appreciative of curatorship.
Yes.
We sort of aspire to some kind of curatorship in terms of preparing show notes and things for this podcast. And quite frankly, I don't see why there's reason to discontinue doing this whatsoever. I predict we'll be doing this for a while, because why the hell not? But so the fact that we are able to bring in and speak to this kind of work, right? Ian, among his musical contributions, just making this whole vast and underutilized and underappreciated or explored or promoted or hyped or whatever, making it available. And as somebody who, like for me, I mean, I have done e-learning and online teaching and learning stuff for 10 to 12 years within my career at this point. And so for me, I just find that whole aspect of it fascinating, just kind of in and of itself. And then if you think of the fact that hopefully, for any kind of robust scene, there's somebody out there kind of doing the same kind of good work that Ian is, and it's that kind of thing that makes scenes so interesting and so vital. And it's just going back to the pre-digitized era, if such a thing is imaginable. I mean, you were talking about that iconic image of Wally with the Coach shirt, right?
Yeah.
Just like that photo, just because it was here's a photo dump of 100 pictures every single week by every single Facebook user. Before that whole fucking thing even existed, you had here's 5 or 10 snapshots that are rad. So seeing those kind of artifacts kind of resurface, recontextualize, and it's a privilege getting older, and sometimes it feels like a mixed privilege. But the fact that these kind of artifacts are there to be shared as we all kind of grow older is really something of value. So to you, curators, bloggers, amateur historians, nerds in your basements and or garages, we friggin' salute you. We are among you, and we are happy to hype the crap out of your work if you ever had the cojones to contact the show. So this, that, and the other, isn't it? Was there anything else you wanted to speak to on that one? What?
On that one, I think I'm good on that one. Well, I'll turn it over to you for your next thing.
Yeah, well, you've been coming at this whole thing from a much more thoughtful angle than I have.
That was just this part. That was just the thoughtful part of it.
Well, I mean, I was impressed that you managed to wind that down with graffiti on the Rock and Rodeo. I was like, man, we are going places with this show. What I've been is really, in terms of my work job, and I do believe in the separation of church and state as far as that goes, and apologies to kind of earlier on that, but for me, I'm in a situation where I'm in full-on classroom teaching mode, and it's a 60-hour-a-week thing, counting in the marketing for sure. Just it is. I'm an English teacher, and so I have had so little mental bandwidth for anything other than just sort of keeping conscious, delivering my classes, fulfilling my academic, duties, and getting the marking out to students. So by the time the weekend rolls around, I'm just flat. I spent 20 hours leading up to these podcast recordings in bed doing nothing except flicking through my phone for an hour every 5 or 6 hours. That was it. And so I'm going for the low-hanging fruit lately in terms of what is sort of, reaching out to me for music. And so somehow during the summertime, I ended up grabbing, I think I talked about it on the show, right? The little CD player from freaking Lawton's Drugs, the little CD player that couldn't, but does, right? It's got a tape player. It's got no Bluetooth. It's, completely as basic and analog as you want. And among the very, very few possessions from my marriage that somehow have, landed with me or followed me. This isn't even from my marriage, but the fact that I accumulated a shitload of CDs and records at one point. All the records have been divested, and yet somehow a very significant amount of the CDs ended up in my kid's mom's place and then back with me. And so now my music habits are pretty staunchly CD when I'm at home, digital when I'm in transit, doing stuff. And so in terms of like the low hanging fruit, in terms of just like I got no serious bandwidth or mental ability to do anything other than just kind of sloth in a position on my bed and wait to be rejuvenated 2 hours before class or whatever. I've been listening to, and I sort of struggled if I should include this or not, but what the fuck. A CD from the early aughts, 2002, it says on the back of this, Ryan Adams, Demolition. And the reason I struggle with it is because the dude had a sex scandal. He fucking texted inappropriately with a teenager across state lines, which led to a federal investigation, which was ultimately dismissed. It's creepy as fuck. I'm not going to lie. It's creepy as fuck, and it's inappropriate. And the dude had a fucked up time with his career, and he still does. And yet, you look at Jerry Lee Lewis, you look at fucking Elvis, you look at people who married 14-year-olds, and like, there's no legal fucking thing on this dude. And he's fucking traveling in Europe, and he's like getting, reasonable people to pay to see him do a sit down with an acoustic guitar thing. He's completely given up alcohol. He's fucking, he blogs incessantly about his sobriety. So that actually is sort of obnoxious in its own way. But I'm like, if you're going to try and swing back from something really fucked and having actions that you caused other people, discomfort and stress, I mean, there's worse things you could lean into than being sober and fucking playing acoustic shows in Great Britain. I mean, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Oh no. Okay. Yeah. On that note, I was just gonna say, like, I guess the usual arc after that these days usually leads more to like, right-wing grift and like $60 Bible sales or something. So, or like, some, horse paste. So
I'm just saying
there are yeah.
I mean, I've read Tom Petty's biography, right? And the shit that the Heartbreakers were up to as a band, like pre-fucking ubiquitous internet and documenting shit online. I mean, again, nicest guys in show business, much like Dave Grohl, like fucking shit goes on, okay? And I'm not to judge it, and I don't even care about most of the guys' discography, but this one CD, Demolition, I relate to it. It speaks to me. I just throw it on. It's like it just stops playing. I sleep for a while. I get back up and I throw it on. I remember, when this came out, the guy himself would have been in his early to mid-20s. He's like only 2 years older than me or some shit. He got his success early. He got fucked around mentally because of the success, for sure. Insecure childhood growing up. And his personal life became a train wreck. And he fucked a lot of people over in terms of their careers. I mean, I'm not saying it's relatable, but I'm also not saying it's the worst shit in the world either, right? For lower middle class people who have insecure backgrounds, I am one of you. So I sort of feel that when I listen to this, I hear an insecure guy who's got awesome fucking top flight backing musicians. The drummer on this record, turns out he is now Steve Earle's touring drummer. Okay, Steve Earle and the Dukes, fucking A, right? It's just Americana. He had to crush together 3 albums worth of material for his record because his record company was leaning on him for something catchy after he had that Heartbreaker record that came out that did kind of well. It was the second album. And it kind of just, got him mainstream-ish, that we're having a conversation about him now. He had 3 depressing drug-induced records, and they wouldn't accept any of them. So the compromise was take the records, parts of the 3 that were viable, throw them into this. He himself has distanced himself from the record. He said it broke his heart to write it because it just destroyed the songs, that he had envisioned the context for. He doesn't give it much credit. I like it because it's damaged. I like it because it's fucked up. I like it because it's minimally recorded, and it's just him and like 3 or 4 really tight musicians that he toured with. The drummer just fucking doing very minimal, tight precision kind of, but still with loose limb to it. It just seems like the artist, the solo artist, and his musicians were locked in on a somewhat depressing vibe, but it's catchy and it's got some moments. And I kind of remember being in my 20s, early 20s, being adrift within my own career, writing poetry and just doing completely unviable, shitty art, but still, getting a rise out of it, and being pretty adrift and self-destructive in my habits. And I just find that the 21, 23-year-old of me that was listening to this at the time, find something to relate to there. And I suppose just because I've been kind of in a new situation, new city, new job, new role, new everything, without, my family around or anything, no real contact outside of work. It's just something that is right now, it's kind of resonating more. So there we go. Ryan Adams, Demolition. I don't even know what his new thing is. I know he puts out like a bunch of new records all the time. He floods the market on his independent, record venture. He has books that goes out, and I just have to wonder, when somebody puts out that much work, where's the quality control? I don't trust the output itself as being like, 3 albums released the first day of January 2024. I mean, I dig it on principle, but I mean, like, why? I have to ask why, other than stunt, or flooding a market to sort of make up for a deficiency of clicks because you've been sort of B-listed due to shenanigans. I mean, who the fuck knows? I don't quite get it. But as far as it goes, I mean, I'm glad this record exists, this CD. And I'm sure that there's other stuff out there that if I wanted to go into his career, I would find equally rad. But I don't have enough energy to go beyond whatever CD happens to be lying around. Dan, over to you.
I need just a sec because I think my dog needs out.
We're back from our, let me tell you, it's creative cut point from Camtasia. Boy, oh boy. I'm offering students the opportunity to do like a media assignment instead of a research paper for their final project. And I'm like, you can come to my office. I can show you how to edit video in 1 hour or less. I can show anybody 1 hour less. I'm not getting much uptake so far. But what can you do? You give them the opportunity to be a podcaster, and not everybody's going to take it. Go figure. Mm-hmm. So I just got off my dissemination, poor choice of words, sorry, on Ryan Adams. Dan, what do you got for your next one, bro?
Well, the next one is one that actually I had moved from one of the other iterations of a possible topic for this show.
Okay.
When at one point we had discussed maybe doing a more favorites in Western Canada, and that was. Anyways, one band that I'd want to include on that list was Vancouver's Sparkmarker, who, sort of were brought back into, I guess, sort of discussion a little bit this past week with the unfortunate passing of their guitarist Kim Kinnikin after a multi-year. He also had cancer. It had been sort of a multi-year thing for him. Interesting thing about Kim Kinnikin that I learned that I did not know this past week, that in the aughts, when he wasn't necessarily playing in music as much, his day job was designing album art for folks like Avril Lavigne and Billy Talent.
Whoa.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty wild. Like,
Avril Lavigne gets punk credit for this. Are you shitting me? She gets real punk credit somehow?
She has gets punk credit in as much as the guy from Sparkmarker did her album art.
I'm saying,
though I remember she also, when Avril Lavigne started out, she also hired the band Closet Monster to be her backing band. Something which I made fun of them about a whole bunch, or at least drunkenly was like, you played with Avril Lavigne. When I met them at a show here in Halifax many years ago. But anyways, yeah, Sparkmarker were a favorite band of mine from the West Coast, sort of in that like 90s, like Ebullition adjacent era, I guess you could say. They're one of the first bands that sort of introduced me to, that I knew of, to put out a record on No Idea also. Where they did a series of, early on, they did a series of 7 inches that were all named after, that they named after the cover artist of each record. Like, for example, the one I mentioned in the notes, they put out one called Scallon, that had art by, Ottawa music photographer Sean Scallon. And the other one,
awesome.
Yeah, they put out 3 or 4 other ones that were all just sort of named after the cover artist that were then collected on their CD that they put out, Products and Accessories. After Products and Accessories, they only did one full-length album called 500 Watt Burner at 7 that they released in 1997 on a subsidiary label of Revelation Records called Crisis Records, which I thought was pretty cool because they were like, it was a Canadian band putting, like, Revelation's like a pretty well-known label. And sorry, my dog is having a moment here.
That's okay.
Just a sec.
Sure.
I gotta deal.
No
I gotta go deal with him.
That's what Camtasia's for, bro.
Just a minute.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Anyways, yeah, like I said, Sparkmarker were one of my favorite bands from that, like, West Coast, or yeah, from favorite Canadian bands in general, like, and like favorite West Coast bands in that whole kind of like Ebullition adjacent era. That Products and Accessories CD especially I listened to a lot back in the day. But yeah, I was gonna say, they were also the first band that I checked out specifically because I read a little write-up about them in a scene report column in a zine, which, I don't know, for our younger listeners, if those sorts of things do exist. Way back in the day, Maximum Rock and Roll and other sorts of publications like that would have, people write in regional scene reports where they just sort of gave a short synopsis of, what all the bands, the different bands in their town and how you could reach them, and sort of what their sound was and that kind of thing, and sort of who was booking shows and like just like other cool stuff to do if you're there. And I ended up reading a Vancouver scene report that also had a lot of good things to say about Insult to Injury, the future Submission Hold, who we've talked about on the show. That was all in On Guard Quarterly, the sort of like attempt at like a Canadian only Maximum Rock and Roll that the folks in the Ripcords were doing for a while in the 90s. That, they really made a point of like soliciting a lot of like content from different people they met on tour and stuff. And, it was a pretty noble effort for, a couple years there at least. But anyways, so the person that did the Vancouver scene report then ended up passing through Fredericton a year or 2 later on just like a cross-country road trip in a shitty van, with him and his girlfriend. And I ended up running into them drinking in Officer Square one time. And, I won't say the person's name, but later on that night, they went out and spray painted punk rock hairdos on all of the on like the dancing cowboy and cowgirls mural on the old Rock and Rodeo bar downtown, with Punk's Not Dead partner over top. And it was kind of a mystery of like, who did this? Who knows? Just some punks from out of town passing through in the night, did this graffiti. And that was kind of my, and it was just like the person that also introduced me to Sparkworker was the one that did that shitty graffiti back in the day inadvertently through like a thing they wrote in a zine.
If you're alive and you're out there, we appreciate it.
I'm actually Facebook friends with the guy because when I moved to Vancouver Island, sort of in the late 90s, just sort of he was living there at the time as well, and we kind of just sort of made that kind of series of connections as you do, when you run in these sort of circles with weird little overlaps and places like that. But it was just, it's just one of those things that means a lot to me, and I find entertaining anyway. And it's Sparkmarker. Like I said, they were a band that I enjoyed quite a bit back in the day. I didn't get to see them, but I did get to see the band that Kim Kinnikin was in after Sparkmarker, who were called Samsara 7. And actually, when I saw them, Kim had his distro with him, and he ended up selling me a copy of the Neighborhood Watch 7-inch for $2 from his discount section. And it just seemed like a pretty cool dude who was very active in the scene out there for years, and was like really involved with like a lot of like activist causes and stuff outside of that. And according to like Facebook posts from friends of his that I saw like after he passed, spent his last however many months like putting together like helpful information packages for people like looking for information on like medically assisted dying, who are having trouble navigating the system, just because it was information that he wished he had at the time, just kind of like trying to help folks out, and even tie-dyed his own burial shroud.
Wow.
But and it's just one of those things that's like was somebody that I kind of only knew in passing, like met like a couple of times, but made a lot of art that I liked, and also or made some art that I liked a lot, and as well like was like very important to other people I knew like when I lived on the West Coast and stuff. So kind of wanted to just give an old like rest in power to Kim Kinnikin as well, and talk about Sparkmarker. And specifically, I just remember the song Kansas is really good. Like that was always my favorite song of theirs, and I've listened to a bunch like since all this, especially, or since initially even like picking them for that other iteration of the show topic. But so not to bring more death onto the show, and talk of like passing and that sort of thing, but Sparkmarker, something else I've been listening to.
That's awesome. And Sparkmarker, when you mention Ebullition Records adjacent, that's exactly the context that I heard about him. My context wider for that being with the Phil Clark 2% distro connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Active with that. Speaking of local individuals, speaking of local participants of the scene, it's exactly that kind of thing, right? Like every kind of area had their own version of Phil Clark. Every area kind of had, somebody who kind of contributed to show promotion or whatever, like Wally, there's so many aspects into what makes a unique regional culture what it is. And I've had the chance when I've been in my lectures in class, the past little while, to actually talk to individuals who I have known who are practitioners, right? Or who have been practitioners in literary art. But I mean, as we both know, I mean, the division between those areas of endeavor, literature, music, arts, are just, it's all part of the whole cloth. So when I'm talking, about my pal Chris Bose, the Horse Funeral Band, who we interviewed for the show, I brought him into my class through this podcast, actually, just a little bit of the interview, because even though he's talking about his ostensibly involvement in his music, what he has to say comes from his work as a muralist, as a digital creator of art, as a person with poetry out there and everything else. So, I mean, it's always sort of like you take one little aspect of a scene and kind of hold it up to the light, and you can kind of see so much overlap with so many other areas and so many personal factors. So I think what you spoke to, with our resting in power pal from the West Coast, really is kind of, I don't know, it's part of that. And yeah, thinking of people both current and who have, come before us that we can appreciate with conviction, right? So appreciate that, bro. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, or you?
No, that's about it for that. It's funny because it's like my list after, my picks for things after that are just some stuff I've been listening to that's much less deep. But
No, man,
it's been really it's been nice being able to sit out. Yeah, I mean,
you got,
talk about stuff and bring a little more kind of personal oomph to it, I guess. I don't know.
You got resonance. It's landing for you, right? And so, where you're sort of trying to sort of dial into certain of your experiences with music, I suppose I could say that somewhat of the opposite is true for me. And I don't sort of mean to put a false kind of dichotomy on that, but if I just sort of look at, what you're describing compared to, what I'm going for in terms of like easy, just within reach, like over to the top table of my apartment. I'm like, it's like I got my digital playlist, and then I just got this, semi-random amalgam of stuff I just kind of grabbed when I was going through my divorce and kind of throwing money at music with some abandon. And so the only remnants of that being now this kind of collection of CDs. And so, the option being, can I just sort of go actively seeking out new stuff, or am I going to even just have less connection with the internet, cha-ching, which is important for me. So dialing out even the digital fucking, aspect of it. No offense, algorithm, don't blacklist me, please. But anywho, and so in terms of what's been lying around that I'm really giving credit to my past self for having the awareness or resources or whatever to grab. I've been listening to the Doughboys Crush CD quite a lot. That classic A&M Records release from, 1993, it says in the small type here. And I mean, we talked about the Doughboys on the show. Highly influential Montreal punk band. My pal, the drummer in Rad Owl, one of his formative music experiences was actually playing a cover set of Doughboys tunes at a gig. And that was sort of something that kind of got him, into wanting to do more stuff with bands and everything. I mean, people kind of forget how popular they were in Canada. For like the 6 months that album was released, it was like they were pumping that on Much Music, and that's when Much Music actually meant something. You couldn't watch MTV here because unless you had a VPN or satellite or whatever the fuck, you couldn't. So it really became we are Canadian broadcasters inventing alternative culture in Doontoon Toronto, and fucking this is something that kind of got, some promotion from that aspect of it as well. And it's some goofy ass shit in terms of the promotion cycle and whatnot that they went through. But if the end result of it is that more people got to hear about this band, I mean, I didn't even really know of them other than as this semi-pop entity until actually more recently in my life. I'm like, oh God, when I realized that one of their earlier records, Whatcha Got at Backstreet in St. John when I was living there not that long ago, their record Home, that was produced by the dudes from the Descendants, right? Stephen Egerton and fucking, the world's best drummer, fucking
Bill Stevenson.
Thank you. Yes. God, I was gonna start crying if one of us didn't say that name. And so I was like, really? And then I'm just kind of, you go back on the discography a bit and it's like, God damn, this is like, at the time, preceding that release, they were actually among the earlier and better practitioners of what we now regard as pop punk, right? They were regarded by the best to ever do it, who are the Descendants, in my opinion, as being like people to emulate. And I just hear a lot of Husker Du-ish kind of stuff on it. Hear a lot of Bob Mould kind of propulsion, on it, and the guitars and stuff, the chiminess of it. And then just, Yeah. So what else? Low-hanging fruit, as they say. Lucero, Nobody's Darlings. This is one of my CDs from them. Favorite. It's the first one of theirs that I became aware of. And boy, oh boy, I mean, I can and have and will go on about Ben Nichols as a singer and songwriter of such depth and imagination and conviction and intellectual ability that he actually brings to his singing and songs. I mean, he's a guy who, like, his thing, they did a documentary film kind of around the time that came out, Dreaming in America, which is fucking awesome. And he just was basically like, I'm qualified to teach high school. And right now I'm making about the same off Lucero as I would be if I was a substitute history teacher. And he's like, so I'm going to keep doing this. It was, and so the fact that he is continuing to do it and that he does continue to do it and that he's had pretty much the same personnel around him, most of the formation of that group. I mean, again, we're talking about something that started in 1999, 2000, thereabouts, and have consistently, every single recording that they have put out has I can't think of any other band almost besides like Leatherface, where every single song on it hits me the same amount. It's like, God damn, it's no small achievement. They got like 8 or 10 records out. And for my money, for the kind of person I am, I like every one of their songs. I can't say that about almost any other artist. And the last one I'll sort of shoehorn into this, Bob Dylan, Oh Mercy. To me, this is my favorite Bob Dylan record. And the reason for it, actually, I think, is because it was something I encountered during those kind of downtown, troublesome teenage Fredericton years. And there were certain people living in certain apartments, and, some of the dudes were in their early 20s and whatnot. And this was part of the musical milieu or whatever that was kind of on the stereo at the place I was hanging at during, the summer I was 17 and getting pretty far heavily into partying at that point. And I was just like, man, this actually has some good songs on it. Like, I knew Dylan was good, but I didn't really find anything that really resonated with me in terms of his narratives, I suppose, until I kind of found this. And I know Blood on the Tracks is a super personal, introspective record. I know you can say like that about certain of his other discography. But for me, I mean, this was produced by Daniel Lanois, so possibly it's got like the Canadianness vibe to it. It was recorded in New Orleans in a house, right, with a sort of some crack fucking top level session dudes from New Orleans. So it's maybe just that professionalism that lets him swing and loosen up a bit more as a performer. And the reason I know that stuff is because he actually talked about that book that he wrote, the book of biography, Chronicles, that came out 10, 15 years ago. He kind of zooms in on certain of his eras, and he spends like a full chapter talking, about this record as opposed to various of the others. And so it's always something that's moved me. And some of the songs on there, what is it? Most of the time, I mean, Jesus, that's everybody Generation X cry along song, most of the time. Clear, but it's just, it's, you can picture John Cusack weeping to it in front of a TV in the 90s in a film, right? You can almost picture it. So that's what I got for, I guess, my next entry, these kind of three that I kind of threw together. What are you going to say on your one, Dan?
I just had a couple points to bring up based on a couple of your picks. I don't know if I've mentioned on the show that Ben Nichols once slept on my couch.
Fuck off and die.
When I lived at when I lived on Vancouver Island, I lived in just sort of a long-running punk house on Chamber Street. That one of the former residents ended up like hopping trains to Memphis and starting a garage rock band with Ben Nichols, pre-Lucero, called Vegas Thunder. And they came back to Victoria, and played a show that was kind of a homecoming for this bassist. And they ended up staying. She was friends with all of the folks that I lived with there, so the band ended up staying at my house. And then later on, I ended up hearing Lucero and just like, oh yeah, that's the guy from Vegas Thunder's new band that is infinitely better than Vegas Thunder were. I mean, they were an okay band, but yeah, it was kind of, 90s garage rock. Not as good to the heights of the stuff we do in Lucero. And, talking about like blood on the tracks and emotional things. I may have once had a very intense public emotional moment when going to see that Bill Murray movie, St. Vincent. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Where the end credits is Bill Murray, after in the story, in the course of the story of the film, after his character has had a stroke and, he's partially, mobility and speech impaired. It's him singing Shelter from the Storm along with like a little mono tape player playing Blood on the Tracks just over the course of the end credits of the movie, and it just ripped my fucking heart out because I was going through, just one of those like times of transition in life, shall we say.
Yes.
And it was one of my just most newly divorced moments ever. Just having a, just emotional breakdown in a fucking matinee screening of this goddamn Bill Murray movie over him singing Shelter from the Storm, like just sitting on a little chair in his backyard. Anyways, so I guess I might as well wrap up my picks with three kind of new, like I listen to a lot of like rap and hip hop music as well, but you really kind of dig to find good new stuff sometimes, I feel. Well, in any genre. But I feel like, with hip hop, there's a lot of it that's maybe not as exciting these days. That, I managed to pick some newer stuff by artists, by two newer artists, one that's been around for, I guess, over a decade or so, and have some pretty high profile day jobs, shall we say. But just one from the East Coast, one from the West Coast, and one from Florida. With I guess to start with the East Coast, and that's New York's Feek and Lungs. Feek spelled Phiik, Lungs spelled like lungs, who basically are a couple of Gen Z dudes who grew up listening to the kind of just like weird, kind of abstract New York independent hip like stuff, basically the kind of guys that were literally raised on stuff like MF Doom and Aesop Rock. Like one of them apparently in some interviews I was listening to, like one of them talks about like how like their art teacher in grade 10 gave them a copy of like some Aesop Rock albums and was just like, hey kid, I think you'll be into this. And that was, one of their introductions to hip hop. And it's very much like, and my first introduction to their music was, I don't know, I hate to admit it, but I spend a little too much time on my For You tab on Twitter, which I will not acknowledge by its new name. And, a lot of it's just engagement bait. But one of the musical engagement baits I saw was just people saying, like, are these dudes legit or what is this? And it was a video of Feek and Lungs, who are just like these two just scrawny, weird dirtbag dudes from New York in winter coats freestyling in the back of like, some used clothing store over top of just almost like straight up ambient loops of just like almost just like weird ambient frequencies with no beat in the background, just spitting these really just hypersyllabic, like definitely keeping in the pocket of the beat, but you really have to sit there and like listen to figure out how it's all fitting together sometimes, kind of freestyles, just staring directly into the camera, and then so it's like I got to check out what these guys are up, what these guys' whole deal is, and like I said, they're part of an artists collective called Taze Grip, that it seems like it's like just a bunch of young dudes like that are all just inspired by the kind of like, I guess, aughts independent hip hop that I listened to a lot of back in the day, and kind of carrying on that torch. Kind of almost, the way I look at it is like it's almost the way that like people, there are certain kinds of jazz that are just like mind-blowingly innovating when they first come out, and then eventually it just becomes like, hey, this is a sort of codified style of still pretty fucking weird, but definitely like operating in a pocket. And it's just like the hip hop version of that, you know, like they're not making pop music. They are like, yeah, they are, you know, rapidy rapping over top of just like, yeah, just like I said, just like dusty old like abstract hip hop loops with most of their video, a lot of their like music videos are just them hanging out in like old book warehouses and that kind of stuff, like, and like sitting around home recording equipment, like rolling massive joints. And yeah, it's just yeah, they put out an album last year called Carrot Season. That's their most recent. They've got a couple other ones. They've also done some solo stuff and like collaborations with other members of this Taze Grip Collective. And it's just like, it was just nice to see like, oh, the kids, they're into that kind of, you know, that kind of rapping, which I guess I've heard apparently MF Doom has been having like a career, a bit of a like, you know, posthumous resurgence via like some TikTok kids these days. And I mean, we're coming up on the anniversary of his passing, you know, sort of like a couple years after, I think soon too, because anyways, but yeah, so it was cool to see, you know, Feek and Lungs are just like, you know, some young guys carrying on the torch of some stuff that I really liked from say like 20 years ago, which is wild. Also, I guess to go to the artist from Florida, it is a rapper by the name of Doechii, who I can't remember how I heard her stuff originally, but she's been around. I think she put out her first release in like 2020, 2021, that kind of thing. From like the Tampa, Florida area originally, though I think she's probably moved to LA or something by now. Though she does, you know, she's got a lot of swamp themes in her song titles and stuff. She has a song called Swamp Bitches and a music video where she spends the time just smoking and drinking with an assault rifle on a fucking hoverboat, like just driving through the Everglades. And after delivering a monologue about how you can do whatever you want in the swamp. But yeah, and her newest mixtape even is called Alligator Bites Never Heal. And has a lot of like alligator and like swampy metaphors in the titles and stuff. But anyways, she's yeah, Doechii is just like a rapper that's really fucking good at rapping, who can also like write a song. Like, I feel like you don't always get that. And I hate to be like, you know, these kids today and their auto-tune, but you know, it's just, she's somebody that like a lot of her music is pretty like club focused, I guess you could say. And it's not, I don't know if you'd say like techno influence, but like, you know, she like references like Madonna and Grace Jones as influences on top of like hip hop stuff. And like, yeah, like it just seems like, you know, she's definitely got songs that I could best describe as things that drag queens could vogue to. Also like, you know, just being like a really fucking good rapper. And yeah, her first big single, or her first kind of breakout single that's like her introduction, has the unfortunate name of Yucky Blucky Fruitcake, which is just, I don't even like saying it, but it's a great song that has probably one of my favorite just like complete changes in direction halfway through, that just sort of like in the narrative of the song has like, you know, her mom, while things are kind of getting hot and her describing something kind of hot and heavy, switches to her mom like busting into her room to complain that she hasn't taken some food, you know, the chicken out of the fridge to thaw or something. And then the song just takes a complete other turn, like beat and style wise. And it's just like, oh wow, this girl can fucking, you know, she can do it. And yeah, like she's put out a couple EPs since then. She signed to Top Dog Entertainment, which is the label that released the first, I don't know how many Kendrick Lamar album, basically all of Kendrick Lamar's stuff until he launched his own like PG Lang imprint, like within the past couple of years. Like, yeah, she's kind of like one of the hot, you know, kind of like up and comers on that label. And you can see it because, you know, the way that Kendrick can like deploy like a variety of different styles while still writing like these very like catchy songs that aren't, you know, they're not simple and they're not stupid. But but like, you know, she definitely does that sort of thing in her own way. And like, yeah, like some of her early stuff, you can see an influence of like, what if Nicki Minaj didn't go crazy? But like, you know, she definitely is above, you know, that's a reductive way of describing it, because like she's her own artist for sure. And just like, it's funny, I played one song for my girlfriend, and she said it reminded her of TLC, like in a complimentary way. Just kind
That's
of in the
cool.
way.
That's a good praise,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, like, and yeah, she's just kind of like one of the more interesting, exciting rappers out there. Like I said, she's on TDE, like a label that's put out a lot of good stuff. And yeah, you know, just put out this mixtape, Alligator Bites Never Heal, that's definitely worth checking out. And yeah, since it's a mixtape, it's a lot of, like, I describe it more as like, it seems like it's like her sketchbook, not so much like, you know, a finished piece of art. And a lot of times, but like, she's got a damn good sketchbook. And yeah, sort of the final hip hop artist that I've been listening to sort of new stuff by is the one that's been around the longest of the three, and that's Los Angeles's Clipping.
Okay.
Yeah, actually they're on they've been putting out albums for like a little over a decade. I think it's 10. Oh no, more than a decade now. I think probably close to 15 years now on Sub Pop.
Cool.
Pretty much
Very
exclusively. Cool. It's two guys that started out in like the harsh noise power electronics scene, that would do like ironic remixes of like pop songs, but just with like the acapellas of like pop songs and like sort of pop hip hop songs over top of like harsh noise backgrounds. And that led them to like just try to practice making their own take on hip hop beats. And then they recruited their friend David, who is a rapper and also part-time actor, to do the vocals part of things, who's like, you know, has like, you know, just like a very like smooth delivery compared to like, you know, they're more like almost like industrial at times kind of backing tracks. And like I said, they've been around on Sub Pop for like several years, just kind of like doing their own take on kind of avant-garde hip hop. But the thing I find interesting about them is like the band kind of take a little backseat for a few years, maybe like 7, 8 years ago, because their singer got a bit of a day job situation going on, where, you know, he's a guy from LA who's kind of into acting, who can also rap, who got cast in this play where they were looking for people who could rap. And ended up playing, it's like this dude from this band that started in the noise scene in like Southern California, who ended up playing fucking Thomas Jefferson in Hamilton on the original Broadway run for however many months. David Diggs is the guy's name, who you've probably seen in something or other. But Clipping is this is his weird like art rap project that he's been doing for fucking over a decade, on top of like, you know, his like kind of cringy Broadway performance situation, which, I mean, fuck, at the same time, that was like one of the biggest plays to happen in a while, you know, as kind of much as we've all tried to memory hole it, I think, like so many other stuff that just kind of hit a wall in 2016. Anyways, that Clipping just put out a new song called Run It, and I think they haven't put out a new album. Their last album came out, I think, like 3 or 4 years ago, and they're due to put out something new. And I really enjoy their music, and I've been listening to the song Run It a lot lately, and yeah, and same I heard, I can't believe he played fucking Thomas Jefferson in Hamilton, like, you know, what he does in his spare time when not, you know, making music for the Pokemon Go to the Polls set, or, you know, being in a play for the Pokemon Go to the Polls set. Anyways, so yeah, that was my pick of 3 things that I've been listening to lately from that end of the musical world. That was basically what I had as just to, like, you know, lighten it up a bit after some kind of heavy talk in the first part of the show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I really dig sort of a commonish kind of element that I may be reading into your critiques here, so to speak, to the extent that Some of these rapper youths are kind of leaning into the minimalism. They're kind of leaning into the lower fi, making more emphasis on, songwriting kind of skills and chops than necessarily focusing on, the algorithm and attendant AI music enhancements, which are increasingly, you can call it auto tune, but I mean, gosh, there's so many digital-ish kind of, it's like trap music. It's almost like, it's just like taking that kind of overworked technology paradigm and just like, well, let's do the primitive version of it. I'm not saying you were talking about trap music, but the impulse towards friggin' just primitivism seems quite strong with some of these artists you've described.
Mm.
To me, to my uninitiated ears,
yeah,
you said it was very compelling.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
And so I guess the last couple items I would just sort of throw on here, just kind of as opposed to the things that I've been having on the repeat the most. Just a few things to sort of shout out. There's this really, really good band from Oklahoma City that I've been listening to incessantly due to the algorithm, and it's just one release of theirs. It's a self-titled release by Red City Radio. And they're just this sort of Americana, bar rock, but definitely on the punk side. Definitely on the Lucero Replacements, hot water music, Lawrence Arms sort of scale, where you look at the songwriting and you look at, the direction of it and what its influences are. And it's just really some, it's really, really intelligent music, but it's also these people from a regional, scene that on the one hand, wow, I mean, Oklahoma music, Oklahoma culture, I mean, it's just like Memphis, it's just, you can't diminish the folk music that has come out of there. But if you're talking about, alternative music, if you're talking about guitar-based rock and shit like that, I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily been up there as one of the top, places people go or come out of, musically or whatever. In terms of the rock shit, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. But I just hear these dudes who are kind of sticking to this musical venue where, they could go to a larger center, more located or whatnot. They're probably working day jobs. They only have like 4 records out or something, and then some live recordings. They changed singers partway through, and this record actually is the record where they changed singers. And it's one of those things that the Apple Music suggested it to me, and it just got into my ear during the summer. And I've just been listening to it kind of almost as a default since I've been here in northern Alberta. It's just, it's really raw. It sounds kind of like if the Replacements, around the Tim era were like kind of Okies and not these kind of hosers from South Minneapolis. It's really kind of, it's got the hooks, it's got the choruses, it's got the goddamn, we listen to radio shit and revere it, but it's also just too dysfunctional to ever be mainstream. It's too shambolic, self-deprecating, and the emotions are just too visceral for a mainstream music format. And fuck, I mean, that's exactly why I like it. So thanks to the algorithm for piping me that one. And then just a few other kind of items that are here. I'm really, 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 really glad that Jesus Lizard are back. I'm really, really, really glad they have a new record out now, Rack. I haven't listened to the shit out of it. I really just feel like with any Jesus Lizard record, they're one of these bands where I don't feel like I got to listen to one of their records because I feel a certain way when I listen to it. I go, I want to listen to the Jesus Lizard and have the Jesus Lizard experience. I want to have the Jesus Lizard experience. I don't listen to it for the fucking songwriting. I don't listen to it for the finer elements. I listen to it and to be sure, those finer elements are there. These dudes are all peak people at what they do. But it is also fucking utterly primal, fucking guitar angular, fucking just weird enough time signatures. And David Yao, he's gone on record. He's like, I don't give a fuck about music, actually. He's got, I mean, he does it and he cares about it, But he's like, unlike the other people in the band, I can do painting. I can, just kind of fuck around with a saxophone. He doesn't give a shit. He does it because he enjoys collaborating with these dudes on this creative endeavor. And I just think that's what has let them, they have reunion tours and stuff. But I mean, this is their first new recording since 1998 or something like this. And the fact that it just fits seamlessly into any of their other recordings, I mean, minus being recorded by Steve Albini, that's the only thing that's missing from it that you can want. And apparently this is actually after David Yao actually took singing lessons for another project.
Oh, wow.
He actually fucking took singing lessons. And so he actually said, like, for interviews and shit, like, he's like, I'm bringing a sensibility to it through training that I wasn't able to do before. And like, God damn is all, because, you can actually get the howl, but then he's like, am I actually hearing words here in English that I can discern? I'm not sure how I feel about this, David. But it's rad is all. And I guess other than just saying, Kendrick's got a new thing out, which, is too heavy for me to listen to all the way through. I told my class this. I'm like, it's out. I'm sure it's brilliant. I've been actually talking about Kendrick in my classes as being somebody as a literary genius on par with Cormac McCarthy. I actually have said this, and I stand by that, and I'll have that discussion anytime. But I was like, he releases this thing the day after he gets, shouted out for doing the Super Bowl, further insult to injury on Drake, and he puts out a song on Instagram. He almost never uses his fucking Instagram. But he puts out a song, this nameless fucking song, and I was just like, I think it's gonna be one more kick at the Drake, like, let's have a good time. But it's like, it's fucking grim. It's just fucking like, he's like, I just got to the point where he's like, he's literally praying to Jesus at the certain point, a minute and a half into it. I'm like, all right, friend, I got you for this, but I have to put you down right now because my mental ability is too fucking weak to handle this appropriately. So I'm saying that's amazing. And I'm looking forward to, within the context of the notes, reflecting a bit on how this stands in terms of those 3 singles that he put out this summer and the rap war of 24, and in terms of his wider discography, because that is just one cat who is going to be with us short of an accident or some odious shit happening. He is really one of the prime movers in culture as an artist that you can actually go, he doesn't fuck around. He actually is exploring, his reality as a human being in ways that open it up to other people, elevate other people. Sorry, Drake, but he does. And fucking his skills with narrative are unparalleled. And there's a reason why fucking David Bowie had him collaborate with him on his last album, on the Black Star record, right? He had Kendrick Lamar come on it. And during some of his last published comments, he was like, I basically think that Kendrick Lamar is the future of pop music. He actually said that. And at that point, Kendrick Lamar wasn't even really famous yet. That was like before his collaboration with Taylor and all this shit. So, I mean, really, to have somebody of that stature kind of putting that out there, literally on his way out, I just think, man, this is a cat who's going to be with us for a while. We have a lot to discover, past and current and future discography. And so I'm just really pleased that he's out there doing this shit, and that I can't even speak to his last song because it was too heavy mentally for me to get through. I think that may say more to me than it does to the song at this point. But yeah, shouting it out, ending it out with a bang. Jesus Lizard, Kendrick, Red City Radio. And I am always listening to the Lawrence Arms, and I bother them on Instagram, and they're the only band on Instagram who actually reply to me. And I'm like, I had this dysfunctional thing happen in my personal life. I'm like, I'll mention it to them. I'll mention it to like John Bowie and the Lord's Arms, CC them on this shit. I don't know. They like Garfield as much as I do, and probably more. So, bro, I got all of that. That's all I got.
All right.
Anything else?
That's all I got right now. It's been one of those, I think we both had one of those weeks where the mental energy has been tapped in a variety of ways.
At a low ebb. for me, man. It's just like, okay. But it has been a serious highlight. So, like I had a conversation in class about pointing to the tattoo. This band here, Flappy, that's the Lawrence Arms. They got real good lyrics. I don't know. If they keep me at this role, which I hope they do because I love it. I've within 2 months I've had to explain fucking tattoos to students and my chair and my associate dean. They just literally are like, does that mean, like, my chair is like, literally, my academic chair said, is that a hold steady tattoo? And I'm like, yeah. And then we had a whole conversation because he went to Minneapolis. He did his PhD through University of Minnesota, and he loves Husker Du, right? So I'm just saying, I'm not going to start wearing sleeve shirts to work, but yeah, I've had the kind of Flappy. I wouldn't have expected to have a conversation about Flappy in front of students, but here we get. Really going into the weeds now here, bro. I'm out. I appreciate you for listening, everybody, anybody. Dan?
All right. Thanks, everybody, and see you around.
For shizzle.